The Vanishing. The palace of the fierce alien queen stood like a mountain of steel and fire on the capital world of her empire. Its spires pierced the clouds, its walls glowed with the energy of 1,000 suns, and its very presence reminded every visitor of the power of the queen who ruled over half the galaxy. Within those halls, silence reigned this night, for the queen's daughters, her precious heirs, had been tucked safely into their chambers under the watchful eyes of guards and attendants. No one imagined that the very heart of the empire could be breached, yet when the dawn cycle began, the shriek of an alarm split the palace apart. The chambers were empty, the beds cold. The guards outside swore no one had entered, no one had left, yet the daughters were gone. The queen's roar echoed across the planet, a sound so deep that even the skies trembled. Her eyes, burning with fury, turned upon her generals and advisors. None could meet her gaze for long. Every subject of the empire had heard tales of the queen's wrath, how her fleets had burned entire systems for smaller insults, how she had reduced rivals to ash for daring to oppose her. Now her daughters, her blood, had vanished from beneath her very roof. The palace erupted into chaos. Messengers flew out like sparks from a forge. Fleets were scrambled, spy networks activated, bounty hunters summoned. Every neighboring star was ordered to be searched, every traveler questioned, every shadow hunted. The galaxy knew what was at stake. The daughters were not just children. They were symbols of the queen's dominance, the future rulers of the empire. To harm them was to challenge her throne. To hide them was to invite her vengeance. To allow this crime to go unanswered was to unravel the fear that kept countless species obedient. Panic spread among allies and enemies alike. Would the queen unleash her armies upon all, demanding tribute until her daughters were returned? Would she ignite another war that might devour entire sectors? Whispers traveled faster than light. Some said the daughters had been taken by rival noble houses eager to seize power. Others claimed the Galactic Council itself had dared to strike at the queen, tired of her cruelty. A darker rumor emerged too, one that made even hardened veterans uneasy. Perhaps the humans were involved. The humans, the strange and dangerous newcomers whose history of survival and defiance already unsettled the galaxy. They were small in number compared to the great empires, but they had fought wars on death worlds and endured conditions no other race could survive. Some called them reckless predators, others called them resilient monsters. Whatever the word, it carried weight. The queen herself paced the throne hall, her claws digging into the obsidian floor as she swore oaths of fire and blood. She promised that whoever had dared touch her children would suffer torment beyond imagination. She declared that she would tear the stars apart if needed. Her voice was broadcast across the empire, and her decree thundered into every ear. The search would not cease. The guilty would not hide. No empire, no council, no world was beyond her reach. Far beyond the palace, on distant colonies and trade stations, civilians huddled in fear as fleets surged through the skies. Merchants abandoned their routes, smugglers went to ground, and even pirates paused their raids, for no one wished to cross the queen's path in her fury. The galaxy felt as if it held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. But among the clamor and terror, somewhere hidden in the vast expanse, two small figures traveled in silence. Their hearts raced, their eyes wide with both fear and wonder. They were far from their mother's reach now, stumbling across strange landscapes, clutching each other tightly as the stars wheeled overhead. They did not know that their disappearance would shake the galaxy to its core. They did not know that the one they would soon meet would change everything. For now, only one truth mattered. The daughters of the fierce alien queen were gone, and the galaxy trembled in the shadow of her wrath. The desperate hunt, the disappearance of the alien queen's daughters, spread like fire through dry grass. Every corner of her empire felt the weight of her fury as entire fleets were ripped from patrol duty and hurled into the unknown. Starships leapt from system to system, their scanners searching every asteroid field and gas giant. Bounty hunters prowled the trade routes while spies traded whispers in shadowed corridors. The queen demanded results, and failure meant death. Her generals trembled as they brought her reports of empty leads and vanished trails. Nothing satisfied her rage. Across the galaxy, entire planets lived under curfew as the queen's forces marched through streets and tore apart marketplaces in search of clues. Even the noble houses that had served her for centuries dared not complain, for everyone knew that even a whisper of disloyalty could brand them as suspects. The search became less about finding the children and more about proving loyalty, and blood was spilled in the name of obedience. Yet still the daughters were not found. Whispers grew louder among the people. Some said the queen's rivals within the empire had orchestrated the disappearance, hoping to weaken her hold. Others suggested that the Council of Worlds, tired of bowing to her cruelty, had dared to strike. But the rumor that clung most tightly to every fearful tongue was the one that spoke of humans. The humans were an enigma, a young race with little power compared to the empires, yet their reputation for survival was legendary. Soldiers told tales of human endurance, how they thrived in poisonous jungles, frozen tundras, burning deserts, and worlds where no other life could endure. Admirals spoke of human fleets that fought like cornered beasts, refusing to yield even when hopelessly outnumbered. To some they were admired. To others they were feared. And to the queen they became the most convenient suspects. She stood before the council of her empire, her voice like thunder, her eyes aflame with hatred. She declared that if humanity had dared to touch her daughters, then humanity would be erased from the stars. The chamber shook with the force of her words, and many among her lords and advisors bowed their heads in agreement. Yet some shifted uneasily, for they knew the humans were not so easily crushed. Their worlds were few, but their spirit was unbroken. To declare war on them might not end in triumph, but in chaos. Still, the queen's will was absolute. Patrols were sent to the border systems near human space. Any vessel of Earth origin was stopped, searched, and seized. Human traders, already scarce in the empire, vanished entirely as they fled deeper into their own territory. The humans themselves remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the whispers. This silence only fed the queen's anger. Meanwhile, her daughters wandered far from the grasp of their mother's armies. Their small forms moved through landscapes alien to their sheltered lives in the palace. They had never seen forests of iron trees or skies filled with unfamiliar stars. Yet now these sights became their companions. Hunger gnawed at them, fear pressed upon them, but they clung to each other with a courage born of desperation. Every shadow could have been an enemy, every sound a hunter. Yet still they pressed forward, driven by some unseen hope that safety lay just beyond the next horizon. The queen's agents scoured every possibility. Interrogations filled her dungeons, confessions were ripped from trembling throats, but no truth revealed itself. The daughters seemed to have vanished into the void. The queen's patience shattered. She summoned her war council, her clawed hand slamming against the great table of stone as she swore that if the galaxy would not give her answers, then she would tear the galaxy apart until it did. The galaxy trembled at those words. Merchant guilds prepared for ruin, border systems readied their defenses, and the Council of Worlds met in secret to discuss the danger. They feared not only for themselves but for the balance of power. A war driven by the Queen's wrath could consume them all, and if humanity was truly involved, then the storm that followed would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And so the desperate hunt continued, fleets spreading farther, shadows growing longer, and fear tightening its grip. Yet the daughters remained unseen, their fate a mystery. None could know that their journey would soon cross paths with the most unlikely of guardians, a human whose actions would turn whispers of suspicion into a legend that would echo through the stars. First clues. Point to humans' weeks. Passed as the Queen's fleet scoured every corner of her empire and still no sign of her daughters was found. Entire sectors were searched, star systems locked down, and hundreds of innocents dragged away for questioning. But the silence surrounding the missing princesses remained unbroken. The Queen's fury grew sharper with every passing day, and her threats became more desperate. She promised the destruction of worlds, the burning of cities, and the extinction of bloodlines if her daughters were not returned. Yet even in her anger, she demanded proof before she unleashed her armies against another empire. And so her spies worked without rest to find even the faintest clue. At last, a patrol ship near the border of human space stumbled across something unusual. In the wreckage of an abandoned outpost, they discovered fragments of advanced technology. At first, it seemed ordinary salvage, but when studied closely, it bore the mark of humanity. The material composition was unmistakable, the design too crude and too practical for any other race. Though the fragments were small, they were enough to spark a storm in the Queen's court. The whispers of human involvement turned into roars. Advisors pressed her to act, generals called for immediate strikes, and the council of her empire spoke with one voice, blaming the humans for daring to lay hands on royal blood. The queen's hatred found a target at last. She declared that humanity would answer for this crime, and that their worlds would burn if her daughters were not returned immediately. Yet even as these words rang out, a few among her court began to doubt. Some knew that humanity was reckless but not foolish. To abduct the daughters of the most feared monarch in the galaxy would be suicide. What could humans possibly gain from such an act? The doubt was drowned out by the roar of vengeance, but it remained like a whisper at the edge of thought far from the palace and the warships. The truth unfolded in quieter places. A scout team sent to a distant colony followed faint traces of biosigns that matched the queen's daughters. The readings were weak, as though the trail had grown old, but they were undeniable. What was strange, however, was that the readings led not to a battlefield or prison, but toward an isolated human settlement on the edge of known space. The reports were met with silence in the council chamber. The queen demanded the details again and again until the scouts themselves trembled as they swore the results were true. The queen's rage twisted into something darker. She swore that humanity would not only be punished but erased, for now the evidence seemed undeniable. But beneath her fury there was also confusion. Why would her daughter's trail lead to a human colony? And why had no ransom or demand been sent? The galaxy buzzed with rumors, every empire preparing for war, and humanity remained silent as ever. Their ships withdrew deeper into their space. Their colonies reinforced their defenses, but no explanation came. This silence was the greatest insult, and the queen would not allow it to continue. On the distant colony itself, a small human community went about their lives unaware of the storm building beyond the stars. Hidden among them were two small figures whose presence would soon ignite a fire greater than any the galaxy had known. They had found their way there not through cunning but through chance and the compassion of a man who had stumbled upon them in the wilderness. He had given them food, shelter, and safety without ever knowing their true identity. To him they were frightened children in need of care. But to the galaxy they were the missing heirs whose absence had plunged millions into fear. Their secret could not remain hidden much longer. For the queen herself was preparing to descend. And when she did, the truth would shake every throne and council chamber in existence. The discovery. The queen's flagship tore through the void like a predator unleashed. Its massive frame carried the banners of her empire, and its arrival cast shadows over the human colony below. Soldiers of the queen moved with military precision as they prepared to descend, their orders clear and absolute. Find the daughters, secure them at all costs, and punish any who dared to shelter them. The humans on the colony looked up in fear as alien warships darkened their skies, yet none dared resist. They knew the wrath of the queen's fleets could shatter their world in moments. The queen herself led the descent. She refused to wait for reports or second-hand truths. Her daughters were her blood, her legacy, and no one else would stand between her and their fate. Clad in armor that shimmered with the power of her rank, she marched through the colony streets, her guards scattering any who stood in her path. Fear followed her like a storm cloud, and even the bravest of humans felt their courage falter under her gaze. The trail of biosigns had led to this place, and she would not leave without answers. The search took them through homes and halls, through farms and workshops. Every door was broken open, every human questioned at the edge of a blade. Resistance was met with silence, for the humans were few and had no chance against such power. At last the trail led to a small dwelling at the edge of the colony, humble and plain, without guards or gates. The queen raised her hand and her soldiers broke down the door, ready for battle. But what they found inside froze them in place on the floor of the dwelling. Resting with the calm of one who feared nothing, lay a human man. His clothes were worn, his hands rough with the marks of labor, and his eyes closed in sleep. Yet what caught their attention was not him, but the figures curled against his chest. Two small bodies rested there, wrapped in his arms as though they were his own. The queen's daughters, heirs to her throne, were safe and unhurt, their breathing slow and peaceful. They clung to him with the trust of children who had found comfort after fear. For a long moment no one moved. The guards who had prepared for violence stood in silence, their weapons lowered as confusion swept over them. The queen herself stared in disbelief, her mind struggling to understand what her eyes revealed. Her daughters, who had vanished from the most secure palace in the galaxy, lay sleeping not in chains or in torment but against the chest of a mere human. Rage and relief clashed within her as she stepped forward, her claws scraping against the floor. The daughters stirred at her presence, their eyes opening with surprise and then widening in fear. Yet when the queen reached out to them, They tightened their hold on the man. Their small hands clutched his shirt, their bodies pressing against him as though seeking protection. The human awoke then, his eyes meeting the Queen's without flinching. There was no fear in his gaze, only calm resolve, as though he had already accepted whatever fate would come from this moment. The Queen demanded to know who he was and what he had done to her children. Her voice thundered through the room, shaking the very walls, but the man did not bow. He spoke simply, explaining how he had found the girls wandering in the wilds beyond the colony, frightened and starving. He had brought them into his home, fed them, kept them warm, and watched over them as they slept. He said he had no idea who they truly were, only that they were children in need. His words struck like lightning, shattering the assumptions of every soldier present. The daughters, still clinging to him, raised their voices as well. They told their mother he had saved them, that he had given them kindness when no one else had. They begged her not to harm him, their voices trembling with desperation. For the first time in her reign, the Queen felt her certainty falter. She was a ruler who had conquered systems and destroyed rivals, yet now she stood before a simple human, whose quiet actions had accomplished what her fleets could not. The sight of her daughters defending him pierced her pride, leaving her uncertain and shaken. The room remained heavy with silence. Soldiers waited for her command, their weapons ready, their eyes on their Queen. The man did not move. The daughters clung tighter, and the Queen's rage warred with the undeniable truth before her. At last she drew in a long breath, her voice quieter yet no less powerful, and demanded the full story from the human. What he said next would alter the course of the galaxy forever. The confrontation. The Queen stood in the humble human dwelling, her massive form filling the space with an aura of power that seemed far too great for such simple walls. Her soldiers waited in silence, their eyes shifting between their furious monarch and the calm human who still sat on the floor with her daughters clinging to him. For the first time in her life, the Queen felt a hesitation she could not explain. She demanded once more that the man tell her everything, and this time her voice carried not only fury, but a rare edge of desperation. The human looked at her steadily. His voice was low but clear as he explained again how he had found the girls. He told of walking through the edge of the wilderness to gather supplies when he heard soft cries in the distance. Following the sound, he discovered the two children huddled beneath an outcropping of rock, trembling with hunger and exhaustion. He had given them water and food, carried them back to his home, and promised them safety. He explained how he had kept watch each night to ensure nothing would harm them, how he had spoken softly to comfort them when they woke from nightmares, and how he had never once asked who they were because it did not matter to him. They were children and they needed help. That was enough. The Queen's daughters clung to him even as he spoke, their small voices rising to defend him. They told their mother how he had risked himself to protect them, how he had shared his food when he had little for himself, and how he had made them feel safe even in their terror. They begged her not to hurt him. Their words cut deeper than any blade, for the Queen was unused to hearing her children plead for anyone but themselves. The soldiers glanced at one another uneasily, uncertain how their ruler would respond. The Queen stepped closer, her eyes burning as she demanded to know who had sent him. Was he an agent of some rival house? Was humanity plotting against her throne? The human shook his head. He told her that he was no one of importance, just a settler on a colony trying to live quietly far from the great powers of the galaxy. His only concern had been the two frightened children he found. His words rang with a sincerity that even the most suspicious ear could not easily dismiss. Still, the Queen's pride resisted. Her empire had been thrown into chaos, her fleets unleashed, her throne threatened, all because her daughters had vanished. To think that the answer lay in the arms of a simple human was almost too much to bear. Her claws flexed against the stone floor, her body trembling with the conflict between rage and reason. The soldiers held their breath, waiting for the command that would decide the fate of the human. Then the daughters cried out again, louder this time, declaring that if she harmed him, they would never forgive her. They clung to him as though he were the only anchor in a storm. The Queen froze, her gaze shifting from the human to her children. For all her power, for all her conquests, she had fought every battle for them. They were her heart, her legacy, her reason to crush the stars. And now they looked at her with eyes full of fear, not for themselves, but for him. The moment stretched like eternity, until at last, the Queen spoke. Her voice was heavy with controlled fury as she demanded to know how her daughters had come to be alone in the wilderness in the first place. The human hesitated before answering, his expression grim. He told her that when he had found them, they had spoken of shadows chasing them, of familiar voices whispering betrayal, of guards who had turned against them. He did not know all the details, but it was clear they had not wandered away by accident. They had been fleeing for their lives. The words struck the Queen like a blade of ice. Betrayal from within her own palace, within her own court, was the only explanation. The realization ignited a fire in her heart, fiercer than any fury she had unleashed before. Yet she could not ignore the truth spoken by her daughters and the man who had saved them. Her wrath had been aimed at humanity, but now, a darker suspicion grew that the true enemy was closer than she had imagined. The Queen stood tall, her decision unspoken but clear enough for her guards to sense. The human would not be executed, not yet, for his words demanded investigation. Her eyes never left him as she swore that if his story proved false, he would suffer beyond imagination. But if it proved true, then her vengeance would fall upon those who had betrayed her. The daughters clung tighter, their relief clear, and for the first time the soldiers of the Queen realized that a human had forced their monarch to pause. The confrontation ended not with blood, but with an uneasy silence. Outside the dwelling, the colony waited in fear, unaware that the galaxy's fate had just shifted. The Queen had found her daughters, but the truth of their disappearance was still hidden, and the bond they shared with a human now stood at the center of a storm that would shake the stars. The hidden enemy. The Queen left the human dwelling with her daughters still clinging to the warmth of his presence and walked silently through the grand halls of her palace. Her mind raced with every possibility of betrayal and every face she had trusted in her court. She could not shake the image of her children trembling alone in the wilderness, nor could she ignore the truth in their words and in the man's calm eyes. Her empire was vast yet vulnerable, for even the strongest walls could not protect against treachery from within her advisors, and generals fell into line as she passed, yet none dared speak. They had seen the rage of their sovereign before and knew better than to provoke it. Now they sensed something different, a silent storm brewing in the Queen's mind. She summoned her most trusted spy network and demanded answers. She wanted every detail of the palace movements during the night. Her daughters vanished, every whisper that could be overheard, every shadow that moved in secrecy. She demanded the truth, and nothing. As meanwhile the human remained in his modest dwelling with the daughters who had slowly begun to relax in his care. They laughed softly as he fed them warm food and tended to their small injuries from their ordeal. The youngest clung to his arm, as if it were a lifeline, and the older one leaned against his shoulder, trusting him in a way no alien creature had ever inspired. The human did not speak of the Queen, or the danger that lingered, only of safety of tomorrow, and the comfort of today. His words were simple yet powerful, and the girls began to believe in protection and love that did not demand anything in return. Back in the palace, the Queen's investigation revealed small traces of deceit, messages intercepted at the edges of the Empire, reports of unusual troop movements and secret meetings held in the dead of night. Her fury grew, but it was tempered now with calculation. She realized the true enemy had hidden behind loyalty and masks, and that striking blindly could destroy those who were innocent as easily as those who had betrayed her. Every corner of her court was now suspect, and she could trust no one completely. The human's role in all this weighed on her mind heavily. He had risked himself for her children, and shown no sign of allegiance to any empire, yet his courage and calm had earned her daughter's loyalty. The Queen found herself in an unfamiliar place, questioning the instincts that had kept her alive through countless battles. She could not deny that he had done what she could not protect her children from in that moment when shadows of betrayal loomed over them all. Her heart, fierce and unyielding, now found a strange respect for a species she had always considered weak as night. The palace became a labyrinth of suspicion. The Queen's eyes scanned every corridor, every guard, every servant, and even the walls seemed to whisper secrets. She ordered that the daughters remain under protection, but not in the human's dwelling. For now, though she knew they would protest, She sent her spies to accompany them and to report anything unusual. She herself could not leave her post, for the threads of treachery had begun to intertwine, and she needed to see the pattern before she acted. The human knew nothing of the palace investigation, only that he had given safety and comfort to 2 frightened children. They slept beside him that night with the stars outside casting gentle light into his room. He thought of the Queen, not as a threat but as a mother whose heart was entwined with the fate of her children. He wondered how power and love could clash so violently and yet coexist in the same being, how a ruler could be so terrifying and yet so human in her care for her offspring. By morning, the Queen had begun to unravel the first strands of the conspiracy. Names and faces were revealed. Loyalists turned traitors. Whispers turned into confessions. Her daughters, curious and brave, pressed her for explanations, and she realized that the bond between her children and the human was now stronger than any command she could issue. They trusted him instinctively, and she could not break that trust without shattering something deeper within them. The Queen stood on the balcony of her palace, watching the sunrise and thinking of the human and her daughters. She knew that the coming days would test every skill she possessed, for the hidden enemy would not wait, and the galaxy would watch closely as the fate of her children and the human intertwined with her empire's destiny. The storm was not yet over, it had only begun, and the threads of power, trust, and fear were pulling tighter with every breath. The final confrontation, the Queen's palace, was alive with tension, and quiet alarms echoed through the halls as every guard and advisor moved with precision and caution. The hidden enemy had revealed fragments of their plan, yet much remained in shadow, and the Queen knew she could not wait any longer to act. She summoned her elite force, the warriors who had never failed her in battle, and gave them a single command: to protect her children and to uncover the traitors before they could strike again. Meanwhile, the human had received word of the danger approaching, though he did not know the full scale of the conspiracy. He prepared with methodical care, using every resource at his disposal to ensure that the daughters would remain safe. They moved through corridors and hidden passages, guided by instinct and knowledge passed down through generations of survival. He knew that the Queen would act with fury once she realized the truth, and he could only hope that he had bought enough time to protect the children from both the enemy and the wrath of the Queen. The daughters clung to him as they navigated the labyrinth of the palace with whispers of fear and wonder in their voices. They sensed the storm outside, and yet felt a strange comfort in the human's calm and steady presence. He told them of bravery and resilience of every species that had faced impossible odds, and how courage often came from places they could not imagine. They listened closely, absorbing every word, like a shield against the uncertainty of what awaited them beyond the next. The Queen moved like a shadow through her palace, her mind sharp and her instincts honed. Her spies had located the traitors hiding in plain sight, plotting to seize her throne and to harm her children. She confronted them with the full weight of her authority and the fury of a mother whose trust had been broken. Yet even as she unleashed her wrath, she could not suppress a quiet admiration for the human who had defied her expectations and shown that strength and loyalty could exist outside her empire. The confrontation escalated quickly as traitors attempted to flee but were intercepted by the Queen's elite force. They found themselves outmatched and outwitted by the calculated precision of a ruler whose experience and anger were unmatched. The daughters watched from a safe distance as their mother moved through the battlefield with grace and lethal efficiency. They saw her power and understood why she was feared across galaxies. Yet they also remembered the gentle touch and protection of the human who had risked everything for them. In the chaos, the human found himself face to face with the leader of the traitors, a being who had underestimated his resolve and courage. The clash was brief yet intense, and the human relied on wit and skill rather than sheer strength to subdue the enemy. He moved with fluidity and precision, showing that survival and protection were his highest calling, and that the lives of the daughters were his responsibility above all else. Finally, the dust settled and the traitors were defeated, their plans destroyed and their ranks broken. The Queen stood before her daughters and the human, her eyes a mixture of fury, respect, and contemplation. She realized that loyalty and bravery were not confined to her empire alone. that courage could be found in unexpected forms, and that the human had proven himself worthy of trust in a way that even she could not ignore. The daughters ran to her, embracing her, and she held them tightly, yet her gaze did not leave the human, for in his calm and steadfast presence, she saw the reflection of strength and honor she had never expected from another species. The palace, once filled with suspicion and fear, now resonated with relief and a fragile sense of unity. The bonds formed in the crucible of danger had altered destinies and reshaped loyalties across the halls and beyond the walls of the empire. The human stood, silently watching the reunion, knowing that his role had changed forever. He had protected the daughters and faced the fury of a queen, and in doing so had earned a place in a story that would echo across galaxies. He wondered what the future would hold, but for now, he allowed himself a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the children were safe, the threat neutralized, and the queen's respect, though silent, was a powerful acknowledgement of his courage. As the sun set over the palace, the queen contemplated the lessons of the day, the fragility of trust, and the strength of those who choose to protect the innocent. The human and her daughters had altered the course of events in ways she could not have imagined, and yet the balance of power had shifted in subtle ways that promised new alliances, new challenges, and the understanding that the galaxy was larger and more unpredictable than she had ever believed. Legacy of courage. The palace was calm now after the storm of betrayal and battle, yet the echoes of what had happened lingered in every corridor and hall. The queen moved through the quiet chambers, her mind tracing the events that had unfolded with awe and contemplation. She looked at her daughters, who had grown braver in ways she could never have taught them, and she felt the weight of responsibility and pride mingling together in her chest. The human stood nearby, a silent figure of courage who had risked everything without asking for recognition or reward. His presence was a reminder that strength could be found in unexpected forms, and that honor was not bound by species or titles. The daughters played in, the sunlight streaming through the palace windows, laughing and running as if the fear and danger of the past days were nothing more than shadows fading in the distance. They had discovered a world beyond the strictures of the court, a world where trust and care could exist outside the rules of power, and their hearts were filled with joy and curiosity. The queen watched them and realized that the galaxy was not only about conquest and control, but also about connection and the bonds forged through acts of courage and compassion. The human knelt to tie one of the daughter's shoes, and she looked up at him with wide eyes full of admiration and trust. He smiled softly and told her that bravery was a choice that everyone could make, that strength was not only in fighting but in protecting and loving, and that she had shown both in ways that inspired even the most powerful rulers in the galaxy. She hugged him tightly, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, that their paths were forever linked by courage and by the choices that had saved lives and changed destinies. The queen approached, and the daughters ran to her, clinging to her, with arms full of relief and gratitude. She held them, and then turned to the human, her eyes searching his face for the truth of his intentions and the depth of his character. She nodded slightly and acknowledged silently that he had earned a place in their story that no treachery or suspicion could erase, and that the legacy of his actions would resonate far beyond the walls of the palace and into the wider galaxy. As the sun set the colors of the sky, painting the palace in gold and crimson, the human stood with the daughters on the balcony, looking out over the lands he had come to protect and the people he had come to understand. He knew that danger would always exist, and that the galaxy would continue to challenge those who dared to live with integrity and courage. Yet he also knew that hope was a force stronger than fear, and that acts of bravery could ripple across worlds in ways no one could predict. The queen returned to her chambers, reflecting on the lessons learned, the strength of unexpected allies, and the innocence of children who could change hearts and minds. She felt a quiet respect for the human who had stood unwavering, and a new understanding of what it meant to rule with wisdom tempered by empathy. The daughters, laughing and full of life, reminded her that the future was not only what she decreed but what they discovered and carried forward in their own hearts. Night fell and the palace was peaceful. The daughters curled up together in their rooms, safe, and protected the human standing watch with quiet vigilance, and the queen, resting with thoughts of balance and justice, intertwined with awe and respect for courage beyond her own understanding. The galaxy outside remained vast and unpredictable, but within these walls a story of bravery, loyalty, and unexpected alliances had been written, a story that would be told for generations and remembered as the day when trust and courage overcame fear and deception. And in that peace, the human and the daughters knew that they had changed the course of events in ways that would echo forever. The queen knew that strength could be found in those who chose compassion as much as power, and the galaxy itself seemed to pause and honor the bravery that had reshaped destinies. The end.